On the line with us now, Representative Darrell Issa, chair of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Representative Issa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me on, Ed, and thanks for covering the important issue of Freddie and Fannie and the compensation, along with their current huge losses that the American people are paying for.
Yeah, I mean, it's a frustrating story because on one hand you have a administration that is clearly trying to stir up class warfare, anger, resentment in attacking private firms that are paying out bonuses and high compensation for companies that have accepted in the past, the TARP bailout money, and that's of course an issue that most of us have with these companies anyway. But that's a far different thing than having government-sponsored entities which are still receiving billions and billions and billions in new bailout funds, paying out these bonuses, and yet we're not hearing word one about this from the White House.
Well, you're exactly right, and that was one of the big questions. We played endless comments that the president had made about AIG and others, only to see that he's never even so much as contacted the regulators directly or indirectly with this concern. And you make the other really good point, Ed, and that is that here we have enterprises which are still losing money. They have 250,000, like 280,000 properties that are just sort of being renters' properties. They have 900,000 properties that are foreclosed on, that are just sitting. They have all the reasons that they can't get this done, and yet they want to say they've had such great success that you can have, over the last 2 years, $9 million or so for each of their two top executives, and even as much as nearly $3 million for a general counsel who mostly is overseeing outside lawyers suing banks.
So, I mean, what are the bonuses based on? Because I know working in the private sector, usually it's based on performance, and if it's based on performance, it's usually a profit performance. What's the bonus? What are the bonuses based on at Fannie and Freddie?
That's what's amazing, and we're posting them online today. But these bonus compensation plans are sort of two-page fuzzy things talking about various efforts they're going to make with no attached percentages. And of course, one of those is, outreach to community to inform them on loan modification and so on. Well, to be honest, I can see where putting that in as a bonus for somebody at 10 levels down in the company who's operatively doing it makes sense. But the truth is that it's not part of what should be the CEO. The CEO should be, look, we have estimates you're going to lose this amount of money, and if you can dramatically reduce that and be more innovative or liquidate the bad debts better, quicker, then you could have some real ability to say, look, it's so much better than forecast. But they're not working against a forecast, particularly not an independent forecast. As a matter of fact, they don't tell us how much they're going to lose. They just tell us how much they want after they've lost it.
So what role does Congress have in this? Because I think that in the private sector, with the banks and everything else, I mean, shareholders get to vote with their feet. And if you don't like the compensation, the executive compensation at, Bank of America, for instance, and I'm just using them just totally off the top of my head. I don't even know if there was a compensation issue there or not. But if you don't like the compensation packages being offered to top executives at Bank of America, you can move your money someplace else. You can sell your stock in Bank of America and buy stock in different companies. Shareholders aren't required to fund those things against their will, whereas taxpayers apparently are funding these things, regardless of whether or not they support them, because Congress keeps giving Fannie and Freddie more money to cover their losses.
You're exactly right. And a good example would be Warren Buffett in his overseeing of the greatest fund in American history at Berkshire Hathaway. He takes basically no money in direct compensation. He makes his earnings from his stock investments that are maturing. And so people love Warren Buffett because he only makes money if he's making money for the investors of Berkshire Hathaway. And that is essentially what most companies do. You mentioned B of A, Wells Fargo, you can go through them, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan. The vast majority of their compensation is based on a stock appreciation, hitting tangible numbers that are determined by a market. With Freddie and Fannie, they don't have a market. You and I are nearly $200 billion invested in them and more to come, and they have lots of losses in their future. So today's hearing was frustrating because nobody on the panel, on the government side or the individuals, was willing to say that anybody could be compensated less than these very high numbers. As a matter of fact, Mr. Williams was rather interesting because when I asked him when he first made $1 million or how much he made last year, he acted as though these were figures he didn't care about. But when another member asked him if we determined that his pay should be slightly lower, would he remain? He said, well, that would be an individual decision I'd have to make. So I won't work for a penny less seemed to be the attitude. The only thing he could tell me is how much he made 20 years ago when he first signed up. And our own individual research shows that, in fact, he hasn't been making over $1 million for very long. This is really a perk he has after a 20-year career when he's at the top and making as much as 20 times what somebody a few levels below him makes.
It's amazing, and what's amazing is that the White House, which has focused on the bonus issue almost everywhere else, is completely silent. Has anybody at the White House said anything about the bonuses and compensation at Fannie and Freddie?
We've never heard a single criticism of Freddie or Fannie from the other side of the aisle, and certainly not from the White House. This, like Acorn, these are sacred cows.
I know we don't have you for very much longer, Representative Issa, but I have to ask you, what's going on in Fast and Furious? You guys are doing a wonderful job trying to get to the bottom of that. You and Senator Grassley in the minority in the Senate are really digging into this. What's going on in Fast and Furious?
Well, we're getting to the top and we're getting to the bottom. Obviously, there's been a lot of notice that Eric Holder doesn't know the difference between a week and a month, or a few weeks and a few months, and that he doesn't read memos that would have told him with good specificity some of the problems that we know about and we know shouldn't happen. But what we're doing now is we're trying to connect the dots between Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and some people at the White House, as you know, who were in constant communication, and the rest of the people in the chain, because if we're going to bring genuine reform, the kind of reform that outlasts this administration, we're going to have to figure out all the injustice in which both political appointees in some cases, but career professionals allowed this to happen. We know how ATF managed to let this happen. We know how people who objected at ATF were pushed aside. But what we don't see, and we want to make sure we have solidly, is various people in the FBI, DEA, and others who knew all about this and turned a blind eye to lethal weapons going walking, knowing that they were only going to be found at the scene of crime.
Well, Representative Issa, I know you've got to go. You've got a very busy schedule. I want to thank you for being on the show today, and believe me, we're going to keep up with both of these stories. Well,
thanks for having me on, and thanks for mentioning the courageousness of Senator Grassley. You know, in the majority, we get to push pretty hard. He has been pushing from the minority, and I think people have to really appreciate how much harder that is.
It really is true. Senator Grassley is doing a wonderful job, as are you and your committee. So thank you again, Representative Issa, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Thanks, Ed. Take care.